Cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Chance to Ask, Events and Corporate Stage Management. Tyler and I will be co-hosting this evening, asking the questions. It will last for about 2 hours, so we'll finish about 8 o'clock. We'll have a quick break in the middle, 5 minutes, just so you can get a drink, go to the loo, whatever. Please have your mics off for the whole session, but feel free to leave your cameras on. It's nice to see friendly faces. And the session is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch back later on if you want to watch anything again. And if you've got any questions for any of our panelists during the session, please can you send a private message on Zoom to Coral Nelson, and she will forward them on to us, and we'll ask as many as we can. Great. So yeah, we've got a panel this evening. We'll get everyone to introduce themselves shortly. So we've got Kate Salberg, Pippa Kay, Ange John, and Gareth Hewlett. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, give a little overview of what you do at Events and Corporate. So Kate, shall we start with you?
Yeah, hi there everyone. I am Kate. I am a freelance show caller with a background in theatre, stage and company management. I started in rep long before any of you were born, probably, before there were any training courses in drama school. So I trained as a student ASM in rep. I've spent about 6 years in rep, moved to London, fell into work at the National Theatre, did some subsidised theatre, and then went into musicals, latterly finishing at Les Mis in around 97. And I've been freelance show calling for the last 25 years, I guess. I'm currently also now trained as a life coach, so that's where I'm going once I stop doing show calling eventually. That's me. So freelance show caller.
Great, thank you. And Pippa, do you want to say a bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Pippa. I am possibly a bit different from the other panelists in that I started out as an event manager, basically, and now work primarily full-time in theatre. So the journey that some of you are thinking about doing, I've sort of done in reverse. And I didn't train. By the time I realised that was possible, I was working. So I just kind of made it up as I went along. Events-wise, I still work as an event manager quite a lot. It's normally smaller scale, semi-corporate. So sort of literature festivals, medical conferences, duty managing in venues, the odd stagecoach dance school, that sort of thing. And that tends to slip in between tours. So I'm touring most of the rest of the time.
Cool, thank you. Ange?
Hi, I'm Ange. I'm a freelance event, site and stage manager. I've been working in both events and theatre industry for about 11 years. I'm based in Cardiff. I studied stage management at the Royal Welsh College. So since I graduated, I've worked throughout the UK on sort of festivals, food and drink events, mass participation sport events, stadium tours, site-specific theatre, cultural events, predominantly as a site manager. So I've worked as an event manager. There's lots of things I'm going to spiel off now. So there's site coordinator, site assistant, CAD designer for the actual site plan, artist liaison, locations manager, logistics, sorry, not locations. And in theatre, predominantly I've worked as a production manager, company stage manager, and a stage manager. So it's like a massive mix, and probably a lot of those jobs you've never even heard of before. And hopefully we can touch on some of that later anyway.
Amazing, thank you. And finally, Gareth.
Hi, I'm Gareth. I started originally in kind of theatre, Western theatre, doing shows like Lion King and Chitty and Wicked and those kind of things. But kind of the last 10, 12 years or so, I've been working only in events. I work as a show caller and production stage manager on events from conferences through to Olympic ceremonies. And I run a company called Q2Q, and we supply teams of stage managers, show producers, or show callers on any kind of event anywhere in the world, where anyone needs us. So that's me.
Great.
Perfect. We've got 4 topics, and they're just about events and corporate in general. Obviously, the panelists' experiences. Events in corporate versus theatre, and advice. So we're going to start off with topic 1, and I'm just going to open the question up, and Gareth, you go away. What kind of jobs would a trained stage manager do in events and corporate?
I mean, it obviously depends on the job. If you're talking as a stage manager, if you're talking about kind of, let's say, a conference, which is probably one of the most common things, as a stage manager, you are dealing a lot with the speakers. You know, making sure speakers are on stage at the right time, making sure they have everything they need, liaising with the sound team to make sure they're mic'd up, and kind of being that person's comfort by the side of stage. If you're doing sort of larger events, sort of, you know, like ceremonies, as a stage manager, you could be dealing with huge amounts of cast on a daily basis. It could range from, you know, 500 to 10,000 cast on a day. So there's definitely no typical day. It completely depends on the job.
Okay. Has anyone got anything else to add? Ange?
I'm going to try and I'm going to not mute myself because I feel like that's just going to become an issue. I think, I mean, I'll use festivals as an example. In music festivals, I guess there's not really a stage manager. There is a stage manager. There will be someone who's called a stage manager, but not necessarily what we're used to. And that would be one for each stage. And they would kind of turn up on the day and run that stage after being given, you know, a list of set times and changeovers and who you're expecting and all that sort of thing. So there is that job that exists on a music festival, but especially out from experience, I mean, I work with a lot of ex-stage managers and a lot of stage managers who work across events and theatre, and they're working in jobs like obviously site management, like what I do, but also working in artist liaison. That kind of dealing with artists, like Gareth mentioned, that kind of comes hand in hand, and it's something that you, as a stage manager, you deal with a lot of the time. So it makes sense to have to do that in an event. But I mean, I know people who work in the power companies who are ex-stage managers. It's all about organization. It's all about that kind of mindset, and kind of it's happy. You know, happy is the wrong word. I don't mean that, but it's kind of like having that drive and motivation, which I think just kind of goes hand in hand.
Perfect. And Kate, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I have really. I think that the job in theatre and corporate are very different, because in theatre, the stage manager really is keeping the curtain up on a show and often making sure that they're almost, if you like, dispensable from cues, because it's up to them to make sure the show runs okay. In corporate, there's so much less of that, because if you're working on a conference, it is, as Gareth says, mostly about presenters. These are not performers, they're businessmen. They're not used to being on stage, and the job becomes much more people handling. There's far less technical to do than there would be in the theatre. And if there is technical, then there's probably a production manager who looks after the technical, and you have a crew who moves all the furniture in for you and so on. But as a show caller, a stage manager on a big-ish show is so utterly critical to your life. And it is one of the places where sometimes in corporate, they cut corners and they think that if they can do without a stage manager, they'll use someone who can just fill in. And believe me, that immediately the amount of stuff that a stage manager knows that people who don't stage manage don't know becomes incredibly obvious incredibly quickly. So having a theatre person as a stage manager for me on a corporate event is just brilliant, because you speak the same language and they are your eyes and ears backstage, and you work very, very closely together. As Gareth says, on a bigger event, like personally, I don't really enjoy them, but I worked on the opening of the Millennium Dome as one of the stage management, and I hated, I'd say, every single second of that job, apart from when they lost the Archbishop, which made me laugh. And also worked on the Commonwealth Games, which again was just no fun for me, but it is horses for courses. Some people love that. Some people think the idea of working on the Olympics in a car park every Sunday for a year for that amazing buzz of the Olympic ceremony opening is worth it. For me, it's just not me, but that's entirely a personal thing. I love to sit in a place with my show book and be that person who's calling a show. It's just horses for courses, but certainly opportunity, 100%.
So I completely agree with what Kate was saying, because there have been jobs where you do get, oh, so and so from the office is going to fill in and do that role, and you know, and I did a job just the start of last year, if we went to lockdown, and the producer didn't believe in having a stage manager, so I was doing both roles. My next job coming up, I was like, you need a stage manager, but why? Just to move the furniture? I was like, no, you've been running an event company for a long time. This stage manager is pivotal, because they are exactly what Kate said, and they need to understand what the speaker goes through, and being able to, you know, it might seem very simple to go, well, you just go on stage and you talk, but to understand what they go through, what they're looking at, what they need as a speaker. And my really kind of my work husband, Raul, who's a fantastic PSM, we did a webinar a while ago, and he said something really, really interesting. He was saying that, you know, in that moment when you could be stood with someone incredibly famous, it could be a first lady, it could be a president, it could be a massive pop star. That 1 minute before they go on stage, you see the human being, because at that point, they're relying on you to tell them when to go on, what to do. And so that role is so important. And I would say, more so than theatre, it's such a personality thing, because one day you can be dealing with heads of state, the next day you could be dealing with dancers. It's completely varied. And another big difference from theatre, if you're, you know, a fantastic ASM backstage, you don't really have much to do with the producers and stuff. But as a stage manager in corporate, you're dealing with producers, but often you're very client facing as well. So it's a lot of pressure. And so to understand the job is exactly what Kate said. It's really important. There's actually a lot that goes into it to make it look simple.
I think that's also the diplomatic skills you learn in stage management and theatre are 100% useful in corporate. Totally, especially even as a company manager in theatre, has been invaluable to me working in the corporate world. The experience I've had as a company manager, absolutely invaluable. Diplomacy.
Tell us more. Tell us more how they lost the Archbishop, because that sounds like a fun story.
Do you really want that story now? I can tell you if you like.
Yeah, let's go.
Well, basically, I don't know if any of you were around when the Millennium Dome opened, but it wasn't really ready. It was absolutely bitterly cold. It was December, obviously. The people who were full-time at the Dome really didn't want us there for this opening show, because they were really busy on trying to get their opening show done. And everything was being nicked. It was so badly organised. So someone would come in and put stuff up ready for a rehearsal the next day, and you come in the next day, it all been taken down because there was no production manager looking after the whole thing. It was just a mess. And I got given the job of looking after carnival artists who were really arsey and had, 15-foot high headdresses. It was just hideous. And I was on the main entrance where everybody made their way into the auditorium, and everybody was late because of the whole fuck up at Charlton Station. So everybody was still trying to come in while I was still trying to get all the headdress stuff through. It was hideous. And then there was this talk going on the comms, which is the only thing that cheered me up, which is, could you just check that the Archbishop's ready, because he's on in about 20 minutes? Yeah, okay. Off. Oh, he's not in his dressing room. Okay, well, just keep your eye open. And then 5 minutes later, any sign of the Archbishop yet? Well, just go and check again. No, he's not in it. But his cassock, it doesn't seem to be there. Oh, well, do you think you could start trying to find him? It became more and more frantic. I was like, where's the Archbishop? He's going to be on in 2 minutes. And then the lovely stage manager said, oh, I know. Has anybody tried the Faith Zone? Because the Faith Zone was a zone that was being built. And I think that's probably where they found the Archbishop having a quiet moment in the Faith Zone. Oh, my God. It's the only time in the entire period that I just laughed. They did find him, fortunately, the lost Archbishop. So that was the Millennium Dome.
Yeah, it's such a big dome as well. That's probably really funny. Pippa, have you got anything to add about what kind of what kind of jobs a trained stage manager would do in events?
Well, a lot of the sort of small scale event management stuff that I do is actually quite similar to a lot of the stage management that I do. To completely counteract what everyone else just said. So as I say, I started out event managing for a literature festival and decided that I wanted to learn a bit more technical stuff. So took a job at the Fringe. And actually running a Fringe venue for the day is identical to running a corporate venue for the day. If you've just got slightly different turnarounds, slightly different ways of looking after people, coaxing people, but ultimately you're getting a show on at the right time, you're getting an audience in and you're getting an audience out, and you're making sure that everyone's having a good time and communicating with everyone. So actually, from that point of view, there's a lot more similarity. It's just that the content of the show is different. That's what I'd say.
Okay. Perfect.
Sorry, it's the opposite from what everyone else.
No, that's fine. I know that a couple of you has already said about certain challenges, but are there certain challenges when working on an event? Kate, have you had any challenges?
Honestly, I can't even begin with challenges on events, but I would say the biggest challenge is, well, 2 or 3. Lack of time is the biggest, because on-site time is incredibly expensive, so there's never enough of it. The hardest thing at the moment when it's live is lack of delivery of content, because events rely entirely on the presenters or the client delivering their slides, their videos, whatever. And because of technology over the last few years, it simply just is never finished. So when you're trying to put together a show book, it's very, very hard, because you never know what the final content is going to be. And you are literally building a show around content. So that's the hardest challenge, because really and truly, in my opinion, what makes a really good show caller is making a show look seamless. It's not always to do with when the presenter's on there doing their slides. Sometimes that's the easy bit. The bit that's complicated is how you get from the previous presenter into the presenter who's on stage and make it look seamless and lovely with music and lighting and making sure that the screens look right. And if you haven't got the content, you don't know how it's going to start. If you haven't got the video, you can't see how the video is going to end. And you're being pushed all the time to try and do a show without knowing. That's the hardest challenge. And the other final thing I'd say that's really hard is that you're often working with people, particularly now because of the way that producers come up through sometimes event management courses and then going straight into work in a production company, that they don't know very much about how production works. And actually the show caller, the stage manager, are more running the show than the actual producer, because technically you have to understand what's happening, and sometimes simply they don't, not through any fault of their own, but they just haven't had that production knowledge. So would you agree with that, Gareth?
Yeah, I would. I think the thing I definitely agree with you on is time. There's if you as someone who likes sitting in a rehearsal room, having 6 weeks, plodding along, then corporate is not for you, because you will come in, and so much of the corporate world are one-day jobs. They literally are, you turn up, you get given the run order, you work out what it is, and you might have some rehearsal, and then you go in and do. If you're doing like an award show, you're never going to rehearse the full show in its entirety. Show callers probably had a chance to do a cue to cue. The stage manager has stood in for bits, but you are winging it. So that's the bit I love, because like Kate says, we have to keep it going and make it look seamless. And I actually would prefer not to rehearse and just make it up. So as a stage manager, you've got to be able to react to that, not be fazed by it, to be able to make decisions. Communication is so important. It's a much faster pace, and you've only got that one time to get it right. You're not going to go into 4 weeks of previews. And I do know amazing West End, people who have I won't say the name because it'd be unfair to you, but I know someone who is massively experienced. She's phenomenal, but she hates doing corporate because she doesn't like that speed. She likes the rehearsal room process. So it's not for everyone. And yeah, I do agree what Kate said, is that sometimes you will meet people who perhaps don't understand what your job is. And that can be frustrating in a sense, if people don't understand why you need certain information for. And yes, whatever size show it is now, you're waiting for content. If it's the simplest presentation or it's the biggest stadium show, it's always going to be content that you're waiting for. So yeah, I saw a comment yesterday on one of the event forums on Facebook, and I think the conversation was about, you know, working practice and let's not be tired in the future. And someone put a comment going, yes, we need to make sure that the clients deliver all content 12 days in advance.
Joking.
What planet are you on, you know? And particularly if you work in the UAE, for example, if the client wants to change for the show, it gets changed. You know, you have to work at that pace. So you just have to go with it, and it will be changes. So I love that. It is frustrating, but if that's not the life you want, then it's definitely not for you.
And Ange, is there certain challenges in site management and that kind of aspect of the event?
I was going to say, if you don't like, if you like 6 weeks in a rehearsal room, do you want to try 6 months? Because that's the majority of the time it takes to plan an event, a music, you know, festival or cultural event or food and drink festival, whatever you want to say. But I'm mainly talking greenfield site stuff here, because what I did or do as a stage manager, that job doesn't exist as a site manager. Site management, a completely different job. It's just all those transferable skills. So the challenges that I would say are, there's two. One is the public and the other is weather. And it's the two things you can't control, because no matter how many signs you put up and how many you know, even if you make them walk through a 1 meter gap, they will still, you know, to get to where they need to go, they'll still find somewhere else. The common sense goes out the window when you go to an event, and you become their mother more than anything. So that for me, it's just, we have lots of protocols in place in events. I think a lot of people think that it's very like, I mean, it's because it comes up from, you know, the hippies in Woodstock or whatever, just throwing an event together in a field and coming together. But it, you know, it's obviously massively changed since then. And we have so many protocols in place, so much health and safety, so many like hurdles and hoops and things that we've got to jump through, that really we're covered for any eventuality, but there'll still be things that will happen. Public will get somewhere, or, you know, I've had a campsite in North Wales with, I think it was 12,000. Yeah, 12,000. It was 12,014 to 21-year-olds. So there was, you know, they're underage in that sort of sense. It was a youth festival. All of them pretty much completely flooded out of their tents overnight. And we made some sort of, it was the weirdest thing of sort of kids crawling out of flooded tents asking whether Calvin Harris was still playing or not, which is hilarious because like he's not in a tent. Just calm down. He's not even here, so don't worry. And then sort of making like a little manger for them, essentially, for want of a better word. We ended up putting any of them whose tents were completely ruined, they got put in this like barn that we kitted out as like a makeshift shelter. And you have to do, you know, you have to come up with those ideas really quickly. And there's a lot of people, it's never just me that makes a decision. I'm mainly a facilitator on site anyway. I'm the one that sort of sits in the corner while everyone's panicking and kind of goes, I mean, we have got this, we can do this, let's try that, let's all just calm down. And that sort of, that comes from stage management, I think, is that I, you know, it is just trusting yourself and trusting that you have to trust in your protocols. It sounds really weird, but like, you know, you don't just write a risk assessment because you need it ticked off. You have the risk assessment so that you can actually act on those risks and mitigations when something happens. And I mean, weather, I could literally talk for like 2 days about the UK weather and the fact that I've had the same festival on the same weekend for 10 years. And I've had I mean, apart from snow, I think because it's in August, I think I've avoided snow, although you never know with the last couple of days. But I've had lightning and, you know, wind calling things off one day. And then the next day we're having people in medic because, you know, in the medic tent because they've got sunstroke. So you have to, again, it's just all about planning, and it's all about like being organized and getting a bit of a kick out of having a huge spreadsheet, which some people love, some people don't, but you know, that comes with the territory, I guess.
Yeah, like I can relate to some of that because I've been doing events since I graduated, outdoors as well, and the weather is the biggest challenge at times. Like if I was doing an open air cinema, so the wind was a factor, and lighting was a factor because we had massive spikes coming out of the floor, and that was really, really hard to do that. And we had like apps, and we was like trying to plan on how to do alternatives and what we can do and that kind of stuff, because I feel like in events that cancelling the show is a no. I think it was for me anyway. So yeah.
Anyway, I mean, sometimes you do have to cancel events. I've cancelled events for, I've been part of a team that have cancelled events for various reasons, mainly wind, to be honest. Wind's the one thing you can't get around, because you've put up all these structures to make it look good, so that they've got shelter and they've got shade, and then suddenly you're like, oh, that massive big top that I was like, let's get, because it can get 2,000, 3,000 people in it, we're covered for shade. Yeah, well, now if that falls down, it takes out our entire arena, so we either take it down or we pull the event. So it's it's the worst thing I found with events anyway is that the promoter, so that's essentially the person who's putting the money in, so that's not the event manager or anyone like that. They very rarely have their own money in it, but the promoter or the festival management, they don't necessarily see the benefit of having wet weather contingencies or windy weather or whatever contingencies until they need it. And I've been you put like 25k towards additional flooring, for example, that can be put down to make sure that, one, we can get the actual stuff out of the event at the end, but also just making sure people don't break their legs because the ground's turned into liquid soup in front of the stage. They don't see the benefit of it unless it's needed. And I've literally been on shows before where you go around the back of the site office and you're like, why is there like £3,000 worth of flooring hidden here? And they're all like, shh, don't tell the promoter, because if the promoter sees it, they're like, well, I'm gonna make sure I don't sign off on that next year. And it's bad because you feel like, oh, I'm like tricking people. But that people, producers especially, it's all about the bottom line. For the promoters, it's all about the bottom line and obviously making sure people are happy. But you have to sort of juggle, what's good for the public and what's good for the guys paying the bills.
I guess that kind of links with Gareth and Kate with the with producers and people are up not really knowing what your job role is and what you do. So and that's obviously as a big challenge as it is. Pippa, have you got any other challenges that you've come across?
I suppose it's just, you never really know until you're there what's going to happen. So there's a lot of thinking on your feet and just being prepared for anything. I mean, the chat just now reminded me of the time that I got sent into Oxford to find a shirt that could be worn by somebody upside down on a Catherine wheel that was covered in fire. So it had to have a certain cotton content and fit the brief of the costume and be able to be flambard. So, you never really know what you're walking into in a day at the office, but that's kind of why we do it, I think. And yes, Trumps.
So planning aside, because obviously you have a lot of months of planning an event and everything like that. Talk us through a day of working on the actual event, depending if that's an opening ceremony or small event. Should we start off with Gareth? And how would you work on a typical day on an event?
What event do you want me to talk about? Because it varies massively, to be fair.
I don't know. Let's talk about the stuff that you've done abroad in Baku or something like that.
So yeah, if you're a stage manager on a big ceremony, you're part of a very big team. You're looking. I think that's the thing. If you're going from theatre to events, everything scales. You haven't got 3 stage managers, you've got maybe 30. Everything has big scale. Same as you haven't got 30 cast, you might have 3,000 or even 10,000 cast. So if you're a stage manager, you're part of a very big team. When you get to the show, you will have a specific role. It might be you're managing a VOM or you're involved in cast movement, but in kind of early rehearsals, everyone kind of switches around. So if you are, so there will always be a production stage manager who is overall charge of the whole stage management team. and that person will assign roles for the team in a day. So if you're one of the stage managers, you'll come and you'll have the schedule for the day to see what we're trying to achieve and what the rehearsal schedule is. If you're doing, Olympic scale shows, you've probably got, maybe 10 different rehearsals happening in one day, potentially in different sites. So the first thing you work out is, where am I scheduled to be? And then if you're doing a big rehearsal, whoever is leading that rehearsal from stage management, so you probably have a senior stage manager who's running that segment, they will assign the roles to you for that rehearsal. And it could be anything from, running the VOM, the entrance, and cueing cast. It could be literally assisting with breaks, because if you've got 2,000 cast, trying to get 2,000 cast back from a 15-minute tea break has its challenges. So as a team, we literally fan out, and some people are manning toilets, some people are manning coffee station, just to get people moving back. It could be that day you're going to be the person liaising with wardrobe to help the fittings going. It could be that you're liaising with the props department that day. So it's completely variable. So actually your main role is to find out, what am I doing? Where am I supposed to be? And what do I need to know? And it may well be that because we may be split shifting the teams to begin with, that you're going to be taking some very important notes to hand over to the next rehearsal. So it's definitely working out where you need to be and when, and what your role is to help the rehearsal move along.
Perfect. Okay. And Pippa, have you what's a typical Dan event for you?
So it'd probably be try and get hold of a day sheet or a running order the day before. Have a quick skim and just check that nobody's asked for something that isn't physically in the venue. So, it's a book event. There's a children's author who wants to play the guitar. Please, can you plug it in? Well, actually, no, because that's not in the building. So we need to sort that. And then I'd usually just be winging it for the rest of the day. Hour live, hour turnaround, sound checking that turnaround, hour live. And if you're lucky, you get a cup of tea while he shows up. But that's a very specific job. And so, yeah, it would tend to be try and prep as much as you can in advance with what the client has given you. But to a certain extent, and this is me being really cynical, but if I'm getting paid for a day's work, I'm not going to do 3 days prep as what the client's given me. I'm gonna be as prepared as I can possibly be, but I'm not. If they want me to do a day's prep, they can pay me to do a day's prep. So a lot of it will be troubleshooting on the ground.
Perfect. And Kate, what about you as a show caller?
Oh, I think it's so different, really, because the thing that I love about show calling is the fact that you tip up, you assimilate, you do, you leave. And that is so different from theatre. It's so different from it's not that I didn't love theatre too, but theatre is keeping all the balls in the air all the time and keeping the level of quality up on a show that is on night after night and is the same show, and you have often the same issues. The surprising thing about corporate show calling is that it very much relies on detail. The devil is in the detail of how well you do the job. So if I was to say, I would say the hardest day generally is the rehearsal day, because you rehearse everything out of order. There is no kind of linearness to it. And you have to know as show caller that you're getting every bit of information from every presenter who's on that stage during that rehearsal, because that is your one hit to understand what's needed. And you are essentially the living, breathing running order for the crew when it comes to the show. So in a way, sometimes when you get to show day, it's almost a relief, because now it's your show and everybody else can just shut up, because it's too late to say, can we change this? Well, it's not too late, but you can hope that you can say no at that point. You can't change it. So it's every day has a format. The first day is assimilate, make sure the crew understand what's in this show. This is the prep day when they're building. The second day is assimilate, make sure that you understand everything that's happening in this show in a rehearsal, and some things don't even get rehearsed. and day 3, the show, is make this thing happen. And you will never have rehearsed it. You will never have rehearsed it, really. And that's the challenge. The challenge is making a beautiful, seamless thing out of a pile of unrehearsed, slightly chaotic. And that's what everybody loves, like Gareth says.
It sounds like you've got the adrenaline, like the adrenaline's pumping, and you're really wanting to do well. And what about a site manager, and what kind of stuff do they do?
Can I
Sorry,
just add one thing quick to what Kate said before, Ange? Sorry, Ange, just to add to that, is that what Kate says is absolutely correct. But as a stage manager and a show caller, not having that time can never be your excuse. You know, if you've got half an hour to learn that show, or 3 days, or 4 months, whatever it is, you have to get your level. You have to be good enough to be able to work to that level. So you can't say I didn't have enough time. You have to make it work, and that's the challenge. That's what I love, but it can never be an excuse to go, you didn't give me enough time. So
I do think you should be able to say, this schedule is unrealistic. We will do our best, but you have given us an unrealistic schedule. Because people always do, and sooner or later they have to realise, there is a limit to what can be done. If you want a brilliant show, call me old-fashioned, but how about a rehearsal?
Oh yeah, no, totally agree. If it comes to we can't do that physically, but because of the speed, sometimes you've
got to be fast.
Haven't got enough time. You can't use that excuse. But yes, absolutely, can be in positions where I looked and gone, there's no way we can tech this. And I remember years ago doing a show overseas, and I went through the whole creative with the creative team, and I then spoke to the production agency and went, so how many days we've got in the venue? They said, oh, you've got 1 day. I turned around and said, unless you give me 4 days, not a hope in hell of achieving this show. So yeah, you have to be realistic 100%. But yes, if you are doing that event and you feel like you can't go, I'm being shit today because you haven't given me. It's a balance. What Kate is absolutely right, but it's definitely the thing that I will never compromise on. I'm sure everyone will agree. It's safety. If you say we've got to rehearse this air of this act, there's no time. That's a no-brainer. If it's not rehearsed, it doesn't go in the show. Safety is the number one thing we don't compromise. Sorry, Ange, I completely cut you off. Let you continue. Sorry.
It's okay. I think it's important to note that what the guys do here is completely different. Not completely different, but a music event, you'll never, as a site manager, turn up and someone would expect you to be a site manager on the day. I'd probably have nightmares about that. But just because you need to know your site, and it is your site. I work on these events from concept to completion, or greenfield to greenfield, or however people want to say it. And essentially I'm there in the initial planning process. So a day within one of my events, depending on what day you pick, could either be a planning day, which is me going to lots of safety advisory group meetings and talking people who really don't care through your event, and they sit there and make a decision as to whether or not it goes ahead, even though you've sold all the tickets, so don't say no, which I feel like happens more often than anyone's willing to admit. Or sitting with the promoter, or with the guys with the money or whatever, and talking them through a site plan and explaining why you need a fence, or explaining why you need more than 4 toilets. That's the kind of glamorous the glamorous job that I have. But I think a show day is very similar in terms of what the guys have said. I have a schedule. Every event will have a schedule. It's a schedule that I will have put together, or like a site assistant might have helped put it together based on when things get booked. And a typical say festival, overnight campsite festival, so a 3-day show, if you're on the second day, for example, when you come in, there's like a handover with the guys that have been dealing with all the running around teenagers that happens overnight, where they're climbing festoon poles or ramming each other with wheelie bins, whatever it is that they get up to at night, because that's why I don't do overnight, because that's what happens. So I usually make someone a tea while they explain to me what happened overnight, and if there's anything instantly that we need to deal with, so like whether things aren't safe, so we have to go out and deal with them. So that's kind of like our handover, and it's making sure the site gets back to the standard that we're expecting it. So if it'd been windy, for example, the crew will go out and start putting the fences back up that might have fallen over or whatever. And basically we work towards doors. So it's exactly the same as like a corporate event or any event really that has a time when audience or public come in, or a time where we go live. We're all working towards that deadline. In music festivals, I feel like it probably gets pushed. There's plenty of times where I haven't opened on time, and usually it's like some really slow forklift moving across the site, waiting for them to get out. But we are working towards doors, and that's like it's the same thing as when you're in a theatre and you're sat watching people come in and sitting there in front of the iron. It's the same thing when it's a bit different when there's like 10,000 people behind a fence waiting to come in. You know you've done well, and you've put an event on that they're going to enjoy, and there's the right amount of toilets. That's the most important thing. But you've still got to get it ready, and we don't have a rehearsal. We don't have that opportunity. All the bands will have performed before, so it's not like it's the first time they've ever done anything. All the traders have traded before, so it's all the same thing, but you're just making sure that everything's ready. And once it's open, for me as a site manager, I kind of go sit in the office and work on the other events that I'm working on, because I'm just sit there and hope no news is good news until someone radios you, and then you go and deal with it. And it is very much just shooting from the hip and going out and you've got the resources to fix the hole in the fence, or you've got the medics to deal with that. So you kind of sit back, and it's all to do with planning. And those people that do turn up on the day, like the stage managers and the volunteers, the more than anything, the volunteers like run a lot of events in these countries. They're the backbone of it, and they have to be briefed just the same. They need that running, they need to be told where things are, what happens if there's an emergency, all this sort of stuff. So yeah, sorry, that was a lot of stuff, but yeah, essentially it's very much planning and then shooting from the hip. The two go together.
Great. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Cool. We've had an audience question, so I'll chuck that in now. So what's your approach to things going wrong, and how do you recover from this and keep an event going when it happens? So Pippa, should we start with you?
Ooh, I guess it massively depends on what's gone wrong. I think somebody said to me once that any decision you make will be the right decision, because what you need to do is actually make a decision. And whether that's to pull a show or to keep going or to evacuate or whatever, making a decision is what's important. And I've had situations where I've ended up on stage changing a mic midway through a speech, basically feeling somebody up. He turned around, went like that against the back wall. The mic was in his pocket. It happens. You get on with it. I got a round of applause. It was very embarrassing. But he was delivering a 20-minute keynote speech, and he'd got one mic and it had failed. So yeah, there wasn't really another way of dealing with that. So yeah, that's what I would say, is making a quick decision and then being able to stand by it and justify it.
Yeah. And
not being afraid of making it for safety. Like if there's something that is unsafe, not being afraid to stop things because it's unsafe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gareth, how about you?
You completely agree. What Pippa said. It's about making a decision. You are, particularly if you're being a show caller, there's a reason you're a show caller. You're the one voice of the show, and so, as Kate said before, we're there to make the show seamless. The way to do it is with, there's certain things with, there's certain protocols we're used to about, run a handheld mic in, basic stuff like that. But certainly when you're dealing with things like automation stuff, having really detailed contingency planning is crucially important. We look through a show and look at every single point the show could fail, and not that automation is not a brilliant system, but you've got massive machinery. So if something's going to grind you to a halt, it's probably going to be automation. So we look at what happens if that piece stops, what happens if it stops there, what do we do? And so I will always prepare really detailed contingency plans at every moment in the show. We will share those with the creative team to get their input, and we will say, look, at this point in the show, if this automated balloon doesn't work, I think you have two options. We can send the performer on from XYZ, we can run the video, whatever it might be. I will get the creative team's input into what ideally they would like to happen. Obviously, we can't guarantee that. And then before the show day, we'll have a bigger meeting with the whole tech team to go through, get everyone's opinions, everyone's thoughts. And so in that moment, every time I'm calling a queue of a big show, I'm thinking, if this queue doesn't work, what am I going to do? How am I going to react to it? Now, the humdingers I've had in my career, which unfortunately I can't mention, they've always been things we haven't planned for. It's always the way, but still to have a good understanding of what can happen. Like if the automation piece doesn't move, we can go into manual drive, and I'll be having these conversations through tech and just say to the operator, if that piece doesn't move, can we still, what can we do? And I think, going back to what we were saying before about, there's never enough time, but you have to know that show inside out, no matter what show it is, because you're the one who is driving the ship, basically. So as long as I know what the show is supposed to be and what is supposed to happen at every point in the show, then I feel I'm in a good position to be able to steer it. And because, coming from a theatre background where, shows, there are certain points in a lot of Western shows where we'll show stop. We got back in the day in Lion King, we stopped more times than I care to mention, but it was, on most shows we don't want to stop, particularly if you're being broadcast around the world. So we're having layers of contingency planning. So my preparation is to know the show inside and out, have good planning so I can make those decisions with good foresight, hopefully, but it is exactly what Pippa said. It's about making a decision because you're the voice people are listening to, and at the same time being incredibly calm, because if you panic, then you've lost no one's going to listen to you. And if you don't feel calm, you've got to sound calm. I think that's the key, definitely.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Ange, how about you? How does it kind of work as a site manager if stuff goes wrong?
It's pretty much the same, but I'm going to be cliche and say that it's was it plan to fail to plan? Wait, that's it. Is that the right way around? But essentially it's slightly different in events because yes, you have to trust that you're making a decision and you kind of just have to go with it now. You've said it out loud, let's go with it. But we have, like, again, there are so many people on an event team. You've got event control as well, which is kind of like heads of certain departments all in one room. It happens in every, events, corporate, everywhere, especially when you're talking about Olympics and Commonwealth Games and stuff like that. There's a whole host of people that are dealing with the public side of things. So for example, something that you might not have any idea has happened out miles away at a bag search check, they're dealing with above your head. You don't have to sort of think about it, and then that information will feed down if you need to make announcements or anything like that. But also we have a great thing in events actually, which more and more people are doing, which is emergency tabletop meetings. So they'll get you together. It could be like 2 or 3 weeks before the event. It could be months before the event. A lot of local councils like to do this, where they all get in a room, you all get shuffled around. So it's people like site managers, event managers, but then it's also like from the medical company, from the local fire brigade, from the police. They put you in little groups and then they give you a scenario and they basically work through your protocols for that event based on your event plan of how you would deal with that with that situation. And these situations, they're massive. They're like helicopters crashing into castles that you're working in. Do you know what I mean? It's huge things that you're hoping and praying will never happen. But it's to test your responses and to test how you do it. And it's never accurate. Like I've had things happen. I've had evacuations before, and you want it to work like that, and it doesn't always, but it's really good to sit there and see where the holes are in your plan. Because it's like lost children, and no one ever thinks about lost children anymore, which sounds really bad, but because it's a protocol that's existed for so long, you just have a meeting place where people can go to, and then all the security know, and blah blah, and you have little wristbands. But because it's been around for so long, actually when it happens, you're not up to speed with the protocol, and then you're like, well, actually, hang on, we've got 4 exits out of here. We didn't think, you kind of have to. And to be honest, it's more likely lost adults than lost children. The children always know where to go, and they always know what adult to find. It's the parents that are off somewhere drinking or whatever it might be and haven't turned around. But yeah, I guess for me, it's like I have to just trust in the hierarchy in an event. So I trust that it's not just, nothing is going to land on just me to make that decision. I have to trust the people around me and trust that they've all read the plan and they all know what's happening and they can ask questions if they're not sure.
Yeah.
And to follow what Ange's saying, it's kind of like, if you're a stage manager on an event, it's knowing where you fit into that whole procedure, because there are amazing people who are the venue managers and the site managers. So the question I will always ask is, what happens if we have a situation? Who informs us? Like if the alarm goes off, the venue inform us. If you come from a theatre background, when you go to these shows, I think the thing that there's suddenly a huge amount more people in the production you're used to. You might have an operations department that you never encounter in theatres. So it's understanding who does what are have a medical emergency, who deals with that, how do we escalate things, and it may well be as simple as I did a which I probably should mention, I won't mention, a couple of years ago, a big launch of something, and we got postponed half an hour in because of the weather. Actually, I can tell you, it's not a secret. It was a big cruise ship launch. I show directed and show called, and unfortunately, the weather was so bad. We had a massive kind of structure on the quayside. We had to evacuate and stop the show. But in that instance, it literally was a case of we were told we have to stop. So we stopped the show. Stage management took the cast away from the stage. I did one announcement, told the crew to evacuate, and that's it. And then we hand over to venue to look after that. So it's very important just to understand where you fit in. And as a stage manager, pretty much your job's going to be get the cast off stage, take them to the place they need to be, and then you get out and you hand it over to the experts who are the venue managers, because that's not what we know to do. So working out where you fit is very, very important.
Cool. Kate, how about you? How do you kind of approach things when stuff goes wrong in the corporate world?
Well, I think most shows are smaller, and most of the problems are going to be technology, screen, kit based, really. And it depends on how bad it is. Sometimes I feel it is better just to keep ploughing on, rather like when you've played a bad note on the piano, nobody will notice if you just keep going. It's far, far worse to point it out. Just keep going. I think one of the biggest problems for us is that there's so little time on site that honestly, the conversation about backups and emergency tends to happen about 10 minutes before the doors open, because you literally have not had a breath to think about this stuff. So understanding the backup situation in terms of kit is useful. If you're in a bigger show, I always ask the health and safety person or the production manager, what is the line of command here? What happens if we stop? Who's going to tell me? Am I making an announcement? Are you coming to tell me? Is there a PA? You just need to understand the protocol. But what I'd say generally is, look, generally speaking, nobody died here. This is a show. It's not a life-threatening, critical car crash that's, something's gone wrong. Things go wrong all the time. And I think in theatre and in corporate, the worst thing is to exclude the audience. As long as the audience are included in what's going on and know if they're to stay in their seats or leave the room or what's happening, and even more for the poor presenter on stage, because if he's suddenly all the screen's gone black and he doesn't know what the hell's going on, then tell him. Don't just leave him standing there like a prune, not knowing what to do. So it honestly, it's not rocket science in a way. It's just thinking, what would you do under normal circumstances if you saw a problem? Just how do you deal with this problem? And it's very easy to be panicked by the panic of the people around you, because producers and people who, I guess, because for them, their thought is, if this goes wrong, the client's going to blame us and we won't get the job next year, kind of thinking. You can't let that influence you when you're making these decisions. It has to be done purely on what's important. Do we need to get people off stage? Is anybody hurt? And what's the decision making? I think you make, as a show caller, you make a very quick decision, but then you have to defer to the producer and the client. What do you want to do? It's your show. It's not up to me whether we empty the room or carry on or don't carry on. Tell me what you want to do. And likewise, if something goes wrong with a screen or with a piece of kit, if you ask the person who's operating that, do we need to stop? You want an answer. You don't want them to say, oh, I'm not sure, just give me a couple of minutes. Well, you haven't got a couple of minutes. Tell me, stop or don't stop. We can stop and start again, but just tell me, is this a small problem or a big problem? Because clarity is key, and just don't, stuff happens, basically.
And exactly what Kate said, the reason why we never want the clients to be on comms in the show, because
God, never
panic over anything, and you don't, and I will push against it as much as, there's only been an odd time they've had to be on and they've ended up talking over me and I've told them to be quiet because, it's a mess. But yeah, Kate's exactly right. The smallest thing that we can deal with and keep going can be massive to somebody else. And you don't want that you don't want someone screaming in your face. You just want to carry on and calmly deal with it. And as Kate said, when there's time to have the conversation, then we can say to the producer, what do you want to do? That's exactly what we do, because it is their show.
Yeah, fair enough. No, that's all really helpful. Thank you. Great. So we'll talk a bit now about kind of your experiences. I know you've mentioned events and stuff you've worked on already, but how did you start working in events and corporate kind of originally, and what made you want to work in them? Anne, should we start with you?
So I obviously went to Welsh College, graduated 11 years ago. At the time there was a small little events section that they did as part of the stage management course. I think it's either got bigger now or they've kind of changed how they've done it. But really, we did an event plan, and it was, I just remember it being awful because we just kind of took the Purple Guide, which is this book that they've done a new one now, but the old one was basically just guidelines and recommendations and stuff for how to do an event, and everyone kind of just regurgitated it in their own words. It kind of wasn't great. So I certainly didn't have a motivation to want to do events when I was in my third year. But one of my production supervisors was a lady who ran an event company in Cardiff, a site management company in Cardiff, and offered me a weekend in Bloodstock Festival, which sounded like my idea of hell, because one, it's heavy metal, which I've got a soft spot for in my heart now after doing years and years of it. But at the time I was like, that just sounds awful. Like, it's just going to be mud, right? Even if it doesn't rain, that's just something that comes with a heavy metal festival. But I kind of had that plan that I was going to go there for a weekend and be like a site assistant, even though I had no idea what a site assistant was or what they did. But she was like, oh, your motivation's really good and your paperwork's great. And I just really want someone on board that can, act as my assistant and just, filter things as they come through the site office door to me. And I was like, great, I'm here to try new things. And then I went off and tried to do some theatre stuff, and she called me because somebody had pulled out and she wanted me to start straight away. So I literally got thrown in. The first event I ever worked on was a Stereophonics stadium tour in Cardiff. It wasn't a tour, actually, it was just the Cardiff leg in the City Stadium, which was the very first event that stadium had ever done. So it was definitely being thrown in the deep end, because when you talk about the venue and you talk about your reliance on the venue and that they understand what they're doing and they know what's happening. If they've never done an event before, they've got no clue. We had a huge issue in that show. This sounds so weird. This will be so weird to everyone because it doesn't really, I don't know if anyone can relate. We had a huge issue where they hadn't thought about the fact that at concerts, because it's a football stadium, so they have toilets in the football stadium. Anyone who's ever been to a football stadium, they're awful. They're like concrete, just they don't even go to the ceiling. I don't understand. But they it's men essentially. It's I think it's 80-20 percentage to women. So there's very few female toilets. We have an event, that's coming in at Stereophonics. It's kind of 50-50 really, if not probably 60-40 to men. And what was happening in interval, half time, the little break in between the support acts and Stereophonics coming on was that everyone went to the toilet. All the women went to the toilet. We ran out of water in the stadium. So we had portaloos outside that people could use. But obviously, if you've got a choice between a portaloo, a village essentially that we built outside, and an actual toilet, you're going to pick the toilet. And yeah, they completely ran out of water. Nothing was flushing. We had the fire brigade had to come, which was literally like on one call from the venue, the fire brigade came, because I feel like they knew it was going to happen, but they didn't tell any of us. And the fire brigade came and they literally filled up the water again in the stadium, because obviously it's on like a huge tank. But I was a site assistant then, and I just remember that happening and being like, we hadn't planned for this, because it was just something that none of us had even thought about, that the water could run out. But yeah, I mean, I literally got thrown into it on that event. It was, it was 40,000 capacity. It was a big show. We were cutting metal things out of the roof because forklifts couldn't fit through the door. It was just like carnage from beginning to end. And then I kind of promised myself that I wasn't going to forget theatre, like in a really artsy way, that I wasn't going to forget that that's what I wanted to do. And so I kind of spent my summers for the first like 6 years. I've spent my summers doing festivals, and kind of like prep sort of from February, March time, and then spent my winters doing small scale tours, and kind of working in Cardiff with a lot of the really great theatre companies that we've got here. And then as the years went on, I just kind of like, it shifted one way or the other. So I've had a couple of years where I've done lots of site specific theatre, and then a couple of years where I've done all events. And when I've gone to apply for a theatre show, I'm sort of panicking because I'm like, I can't remember what's the book thing, the prompt, what's it called? So you're trying to remember your terminology over again. But I kind of just flip between the two, and I've kept doing that ever since. But I will always go back to theatre. I think I kind of pick and choose theatre a bit more than I do events. Like if someone asks me to do an event, I'm like, yeah, I'm there. Especially now. I'd bite their arm off. But the with theatre, I think I'm a bit more choosy. I like to stay in Cardiff or in South Wales, because it's just a luxury that I can live at home. But yeah, I go back to Welsh College quite a bit, just to see what's going on there. And the course has changed loads over the years anyway. And we're in the company that I've been in recently, we literally employ so many people out of Welsh College, and out of there's a few other, I think Bristol, Ulvic, we've had 2 or 3 out there just to come and try out events. Sounds funny, but we always know they're going to be good, because it's the kind of people that you are. So it's just giving them the opportunity to have a go.
Cool.
Yeah, sorry.
Great. Kate, how about you? How did you kind of first get into events and corporate?
Because I was working on a production called Time at the Dominion with Cliff Richard in the mid-80s, and the production manager, who I'd already worked with actually once in the past, Paul Mackay, was working at Imagination, and he said, do you want to come and talk to us about doing a corporate event? And actually, when I first started in theatre, because I grew up in a theatre family as well, and I don't want to do corporate events, that's people just selling cars and things. It's just disgusting. I'm just going to stick with theatre. But once you've got kids and a family, and it's going to pay you twice as much in a day as working in the theatre does, then it's a kind of a no-brainer to have a go. And that's how I fell into it with Imagination, who at the time was the biggest kind of production company, and they're still on the go, and they still spend more money than most other production companies on their stuff. And then I went back to theatre because I wasn't confident that I'd get enough work. I went back to Les Mis, and then I went full-time freelance in 97, and I haven't really stopped since then. And I think Time was groundbreaking. It was a terrible show, but it was groundbreaking prototype machinery, really, really complicated stuff. And it had quite a profound effect on the events industry, actually, in terms of all blinding lights and fairy lights and piles of smoke and mirrors. And it was useful. So, and I think now, one of the, or perhaps not quite so much now, but certainly when I first started, one of the things that's appealing about corporate events is they had more money. They had more money to spend, and you could do bigger stuff than you do in the theatre. And there were times when you'd work on a show that you'd think this show would keep a repertory theatre in going for a year.
Mm.
The budgets are just insane. No, not quite so much now. But yeah, I fell into it. Isn't that how most things happen?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Cool. Pippa, I know you sort of mentioned that you sort of started in events originally. How did you do that?
So I worked in bookshops all through uni. I've got an English degree. I thought I wanted to work in publishing. I worked as a volunteer steward on a literature festival, thinking that that would be a really interesting route into publishing, and got a bit sidetracked, basically. And something clicked, and I realised that I could run a show, and kind of it built from there. So something came out that was quite nice off that, but not really what I'd intended. And yeah, it odds and sods ever since, really.
Yeah, amazing, fab. And Gareth, how about you? How did you kind of start working in events?
I was definitely bored of theatre. I love, I still love theatre, but 8 shows a week, and the shows I did always just never stop rehearsing. You just never stop rehearsing, and so you just give your life to that show, and I wasn't. And I had some great experience, I had some terrible experience for working with some horrendous stage managers who will name nameless right now, but I learned a huge amount. But I wanted to be scared by my job and be excited by it and new challenges. And I came out of the West End and kind of did a few years and kind of did a random year, did a show in Theatre Clwyd. I did some work in TV. I worked for ITV on Today with Des and Mel and Loose Women. I was theatre floor manager. That money, think theatre money is bad. The rate I got paid for Loose Women was about £170 a week, but I had the best time for 10 weeks. It was just fantastic. But I, over many years, worked National Youth Theatre in the summer and devised a stage management course. And in 2000, I sort of started to be interested in the events world. In 2008, National Youth Theatre went to Beijing to sing the national anthem as part of the handover London 2012. And I sort of, I met the stage management team led by Sam Hunter, and just said, look, I'm with them. If you can use me for something else, please do. So yeah, absolutely. So I kind of stuck myself to that team and, set some props on the field of play and was on the field of play, 90,000 audience going, this is insane, this is where I want to be, these shows are incredible. And then just knew it would take me a long time, but just I had some fantastic friends who recommended me for jobs, and word of mouth, and like Kate says, you kind of fall into it, you kind of get with a company and they like to use you again and again. I was one of the many stage managers in London 2012, and I will always remember crossing the field of play one day thinking, will I ever get to call a show this big? And people started giving me opportunities and jobs, and it's hard to say exactly why people gave me jobs, but it's incredible, and I absolutely love every second of it, and I think it's an incredible thing to do. So theatre, I still have a huge fondness for my time in theatre. I can't see myself ever going back to it. Maybe this case of the money is, you can't compare it, but it's not about money what we do, but it does help. But I love events, and there's still I'm still very ambitious stuff I want to do, and having the last year kind of putting a pause. I know it's been hard for everyone. Like, it's a year I've lost the stuff I could have done, so I just itching to get back into doing it properly. So and the one thing I just want to add to what I know we're going to break in a second, talking what Anne's talking about, I have to say, when we do the big shows, I have the biggest respect for the operations and the venue team, because those are the people that make sure we can do our rehearsals and make sure everything's there and the power's there and the lights are there. And you're talking about toilets, but oh my goodness, having enough toilets that 5,000 people can use in a rehearsal. Without them, we would be nothing. So
I completely agree, Gareth. And actually, from what you were just saying, Ange, only about, pre-COVID, I did a show at there's an old venue in London in Docklands. I can't remember what it's called. They ran out of water for the loos after the first hour. And you'd think, surely by now you must know this happens. You're going to have loads of women in here. You must know.
Yeah,
but
whenever I do a stadium show now, people look at me like I'm crazy because I'm like, exactly how many flushes can we do
my
before
God,
that runs out?
The toilets,
Well,
I quite agree. The site management just defer to you at every point.
Whenever I have a new site assistant on a show that maybe hasn't done an event like that before, I'll always give them the toilets to look after. I'll, like in terms of like the ratio and stuff you can help with, but I'll always give them the toilets, because actually you suddenly realize, you're like, whoa, no, now this is actually really important.
And actually, if you've ever worked in India or China, believe me.
Yeah,
Love a Portaloo then.
I mean, yeah, some of the old exhibition centres in China. God. Yeah, that
don't drink all day.
I just talking about it. I was in Saudi Arabia doing an event, and we were setting up an open air cinema, and there was a load of Portaloo, massive like container toilets that came in, and just plonked them in the middle. And then halfway through the shows or halfway through the films, they'll just come in and fill the water. And it was a massive, massive, loud, like pump filling of the water. And it was like, that can't happen. That can't happen. Yeah, no, we have to do it now. So it's like, oh no. So yeah, so that's another challenge, isn't it? Working abroad. But yeah.
Without toilets, you can't do the shows. And
that's true. What would you rather do without the show or going to the loo? I don't know. Going to the loo probably.
And a lot of the time, actually, I've had to pull shows before because the toilets are out of order. As in, like, not out of order, but like, so a lot of the time we put Portaloos inside. If it's like in the winter, we put them inside a marquee. Obviously with all the windows, everything open. But like if they can't afford an actual trailer, they'll do that. And then you've got to look at what the wind speed is for that marquee and where that marquee will fly to if it goes. And suddenly you're going, no, the actual structure that you're doing your show in, like I've done a show in Cardiff Castle, it's like a whirlpool. If any wind gets in, it's just like whips around. And I'm like, no, your Spiegel tent is fine. That'll still be there. But the toilets marquee, that's going to go. So that's why we need to pull. And it's quite odd that, there are, at what level do you have to call a show, or do you have to start, what's your priority, essentially? But yes, everybody needs a loo.
Fab. So yeah, so thinking again, still about kind of your experience of events in corporate, what is the most unusual or exciting event that you've worked on? Kate, let's go with you first.
Well, when you think about exciting corporate events, that's a bit tricky because I think the best one I did in corporate was a strange put together show, which was actually for a launch of a bank, but it was written around the myth of the North Star, because it was called the North Star Bank. And it was a really theatrical show, 360-degree projection with skaters and aerialists, and all pre-recorded, all on time code, but really complicated in terms of mixing in the aerialists and the dancers and the skaters all together. And it was just like doing theatre. So it was absolutely, absolutely brilliant. Mm-hmm. In terms of theatre, I'd say the hardest and probably the most kind of challenging have been the Les Mis and Phantom concerts, just because there was so little time to get them on. And it's very much like a mixture between corporate and theatre, those jobs. But yeah, that's it, I'd say.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. Pippa, how about you?
So my sort of most interesting sort of eventy job was probably, I used to work on a conference that was for doctors, but was about the fusion of art and science from a sort of medical point of view.
Right.
So we had patients giving testimonies and people talk. There was one where the theme was the voice. So there were singers and there were people talking about the dissection of a voice box, but also how you might paint someone's voice. And it was all completely stuff that I know absolutely nothing about. So incredibly fascinating. There wasn't a single boring speaker, and everybody was really, really clever and really, really interesting, and only spoke for about 10 minutes. So it was a nightmare to try and get them all queued up and going, especially because you just wanted to find out more. So that was quite exciting, and it was completely sold out. Wouldn't have been able to get a ticket for myself. So it was open to the public as well as medical professionals. Wouldn't have been able to get a ticket for Love or Money, and it was absolutely brilliant.
Cool.
Yeah, I always like stuff where I'd never think of going, and you end up having a good time and learning something new.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that sounds really interesting. Cool. Gareth, how about you?
Oh my goodness, I don't know where to start. So many things, different reasons. We did the first ever national day in Saudi Arabia about 4 or 5 years ago when shows were legal. It was not an easy time for many reasons. But first time ever, women were allowed in the stadium. Excuse me, women were allowed in the stadium to watch, and we put the first ever Saudi woman actress on stage. And I was caught in the middle of the stadium, and no one knew which way it would go, and the audience just erupted, and it was so emotional because it made history. And then a few weeks later, they were able to drive, so that was incredible. I did a show in Turkmenistan, which is an interesting place to be, and we weren't in Ashgabat, we were in Turkmenbashi, so there were no hotels. We were opening a seaport with a beautiful content, like very theatrical show, but the only accommodation was the workers' camp, which looked a bit like Guantanamo Bay in the sense, but it was, we kind of, when else in our life we're going to stay in a workers' camp. We had a little tin hut each. We had like AC and a little bathroom and stuff, when else you're going to, so that was, it was only 2 weeks, and that was an incredible experience. And then to get to call the big, 2019, I had 2 of my best ever experiences. It was in March, it's calling the World Games, Special Olympics in Abu Dhabi, and then in December called Southeast Asian Games in Manila. And both shows were just incredible, because the shows are brilliant, but working with the most amazing people, and we laughed every day. But then some of the smaller, every year I do the Sun Military Awards, the Millies, very small one-day show, award show, but that's wonderful because you are, like Kate said earlier, all we're doing is putting on a show. These people who win awards they are literally saving lives and doing the most heroic acts, and they don't want the applause, they don't want the attention. But you always put on that show about 6 years now, and you always come away and go, oh my God, these people are amazing. I feel like all I do is put on shows. So yeah, everything has really different emotions, and might be digressing a little bit, but I think one of the things that makes my work so special is that I get to work in so many different countries, and you get to work with teams. No matter what kind of show we're doing, there will always be a big proportion of the station management team will be locals, and you get to learn their culture, their experience. They take you out the best places to eat, and you learn about those cultures. And I've got friends around the world from that, and that's amazing. And that to me is one of the most special parts about what we do. So yeah, everything has its different reasons, and even if you have a job that's hideous or in a hideous country, you still have that experience, and I don't take any of it for granted. So yeah, I kind of love it all, really.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, no, that's a really interesting array of experiences. Ange, how about you?
Again, I mean, there's so many for so many different reasons, I guess. For me, it's when I like kind of really in my element, site management wise, is when I do site specific work, which isn't very often, because a lot of the time when the site specific stage managers, there are people that do that very well. But I did you may have had people on that have spoken about it on the panels, the City of the Unexpected, which was the Roald Dahl takeover of Cardiff, essentially. And I came on that quite late. So when I talk about site management, you'll never be asked to just turn up on the day, I kind of was on that show, and it did not go great because of that. But essentially they were expecting about 10,000 people to come to this. It was a celebration of Roald Dahl. It was all over the whole city, and the whole part of it was that it was unexpected, which meant that they didn't tell anyone where anything was at all, because that was part of the fun of it. And if there'd been 10,000 people that came, I think it would have been amazing, because people would have been like going down the arcades and finding stilt walkers and aerialists in the middle of town. And we had I was looking after the castle, which I do a lot of events in. Sorry, which is why they, I think, asked me, just because I knew it and I didn't have to have much prep on it. And they had like a tightrope walker, and phenomenal. This guy, without anything, walked from the corner of the castle across the road, essentially, which, if anyone knows Cardiff, it's quite a distance, and dressed as a fox with a huge fox head that he couldn't even see. And in theory, we had lots of rehearsals and stuff that I had been part of, and we'd done the tightrope in the middle of the night before, while it was empty. And in theory, it was going to be incredible, and it was incredible. However, they had 125,000 people that came, not 10. So the infrastructure that they put in place, which was this app that basically as you got close to things, I think it was, that it would like beep, and then you'd know that there was something nearby, and all this, it basically just crashed because it couldn't deal with that amount of people. It was a boiling hot day. It wasn't a game day, and they were clever enough not to do the two same, because that would have been, I don't even want to guess what would have happened then. But everyone just came out in their droves, and it was phenomenal. But it was rammed. And I was stood, and I've got loads of pictures of just the castle street, just absolutely, like, you couldn't see. And I'm used to seeing crowds like that. I'm used to seeing people where you just see in their heads. But a lot of the people who worked within the team weren't used to that, and there was a lot of panicking going on, a lot of people thinking there was like crushes going to happen and all that sort of thing. And it was just, when I talk about that show, people are like, why do you like it? Like, it was awful. Like, other people that worked on it are just like, oh my god. But I was like, no, but it was so much fun. Nothing went wrong, like no one got hurt. I stood at the bottom of the castle turret, which, I mean, I have a lot of fondness for that castle. I've done lots and lots of events in there. And I'm always happy to go back in, regardless of whatever the event is. And I stood at the bottom of that castle with a microphone that somebody had given me, and I can't even remember who gave it to me. And I was telling people for 3 hours where things were in the city, to try and get people away from the castle, because essentially everyone just gravitated towards it. And it was awful in some cases, because people thought I was lying to them, and it was lots of, and all this sort of stuff. But I lie about a giant peach. There's the sort of things I get a kick out of. But it just, like, it, to me, it's unusual or exciting because it's so memorable. Like, I see people I haven't seen in years, and they're like, oh my god, weren't you like the one screaming down Castle Street back in like 2016? I'm like, about a fox. Yeah, that was me. So that's kind of like why I always think of that event. But there's lots of other ones. Anything that I do in Cardiff, I love, because this is where, I'm from Swansea originally, but I've lived here for so long now. And it's got amazing artists, amazing talent, phenomenal, like, stage managers and companies. But actually, like, it's just anytime that I can work here and use locals as much as possible, that's when I kind of get a kick out of it.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like amazing. Cool. So so sort of talking a bit about sort of events and corporate versus working on theatre. I know you've all kind of touched on like skills that cross over between the two disciplines. But have you kind of learned any new skills that maybe you didn't have with working on theatre events from working in events and corporate? Kate, shall we start with you?
I've learned a massive amount that I didn't know in theatre, because the tools that you use to call a show are entirely different. You don't really use screens in theatre. I mean, I know they use screens in theatre now, but if you were to use screens in theatre, they're more than likely pre-programmed as part of the pre-production session, and then they'd be put automated cues into the lighting desk, etc. You have to learn about you have to learn the whole thing about what do you call these things the first time you go to see it. What is this thing called? How does it work? How does it get to the screen? You learn completely how to call a show without any sort of structure or linearness to it. The fact that you are much more like a producer than you are in the theatre, it's so utterly different, and yet the skills that you learn in the theatre are totally transferable, I'd say, and they really do have a place. But it's such a completely different skill set. And the challenge for everybody who's thinking about going into events is you just have to jump in, because no one's going to give you that, oh, you've got a week to learn it, you've got a day to learn it, I can just walk you around and I can teach you how to do this. You've just got to jump in, because there is no time. It's always to do with lack of time. And what we love about it, I think what you were just saying about the inspirational side of it is, I've done so many shows over the years. You can't possibly pick a show or an event, because there are some bits of events that are boring, and there's some bits of events that are amazing. You get amazing speakers that you would never normally see, and the privilege of meeting really, really interesting, extraordinary people. I mean, you meet interesting, extraordinary people in the theatre as well, but they're all theatre people. These are kind of like all kinds of people. It's yeah. So yes, huge amount I have learned.
Cool. Ange, how about you, kind of with site managing?
I mean, talking about like actual skills, then yes, there are a lot of physical things that I know now that I definitely didn't know when I started just doing theatre. That, a simple thing for me is something that I use every single day, which is AutoCAD and site design. Obviously, yes, if you're a production manager, I do use AutoCAD, but I certainly wouldn't even know where to start with it if I didn't use it every single day. I drive a forklift. I don't think I would have done that if I was just in theatre, although I'm sure somebody would try and squeeze it into a show if they had the opportunity. I have got skills in that sort of sense, but I think the biggest difference for me, understanding very quickly, is terminology. Just like Kate said, like you have to learn it, and you only learn it by using it. I'm being confident in how you're talking about the differences, and rather than just keep trying to relate it back to theatre, because a lot of the time there is no that this doesn't exist in theatre, or this doesn't exist in events, so you just have to ask. And that's the same thing when I talk about site assistants on shows. I get them to like read an event plan if they've never seen one before, and even though it's really boring and I'm really cruel for making them do it, and then I just tell them to write down things that they don't know, and then we'll go through it. And I'm like, it really doesn't matter what it is. A lot of the time it's the differences between like trackway and track mat and fencing and high hoard and all these random words that just exist in events that don't exist in theatre, because you don't need those things. But again, it's that confidence to once you know the word, to use it and not be scared to use it. So yeah, I think that's for me. But I mean there's probably hundreds and hundreds of skills that I've learned since, but yeah.
Cool. Pippa, how about you? Have you got any other?
My big one was probably volunteer management, because so many times you're working with large teams of people who are there because that's how they get a free ticket. And I think I've learned a lot about how to be better at it, but the way that you will treat a team of volunteers who are students, who are stage management students, who are science students, is different from each other, and is very different from how you'll treat a team of pensioners who are working on a classical music festival to get a free ticket. I remember I was front of house managing for a classical music festival when I was starting out, and I got told off because I called the volunteers guys, and the older ladies were very upset about being referred to as guys, and I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, and sort of learning how to explain things quickly and simply without too much jargon to large groups of people who have never done it before and are probably slightly terrified about how to tear a ticket is definitely, hopefully, a useful new skill.
Yeah, cool, great. Gareth, how about you?
Just completely echoing everything Kate said. It's learning the systems. The first big kind of corporate event I called in Paris, D3, watch out, encore, what are these things, and presets, and yeah, a lot of that I learned on the job. But yeah, that's a big shift. And I think you ask anyone who goes from theatre to, sorry, my notifications run. Anyone who goes from theatre to events will say the same thing. It's learning all these systems, and yeah, why we're using them for, and yeah, that's definitely the biggest thing. I've learned so much with that. You know, I've learned about, I can talk for hours about how timecode works, you know, all these systems I had never had a clue about before. And again, echoing what Kate said, we learn, we meet so many amazing people, we learn to deal with new people. But I think fundamentally, you know, the skills are, you know, with show calling, it's very different, but fundamentally, if I'm calling the tiniest fringe show in Edinburgh, I'm calling the biggest ceremony, I can't speak, I'm still saying stand by, and I'm still saying go. You know, fundamentally what we do is the same. With stage management, fundamentally it's about a people job. You're moving cast, you know, so much is transferable. I think it's just the scale that increases. But certainly as the shows have got bigger, I've gained in confidence, and I've learned so much, and it's the oldest thing in the world, but you never stop learning in this job, ever. Every show is different, every situation is different. I'm my biggest critic. You know, I could have handled that a bit better, I could have spoken to that person better, I could have, you know, handled that better. And it's you know, it's every day is different, and that's what's so exciting about it. But yeah, the biggest thing is learning all the systems, and that watch out is actually a video system. It's not actually meaning watch out, you know, all these things and what they are, and that, but once you got that in your belt, you're absolutely fine.
And watch out is called watch out for a very good reason. Like watch out, you're using watch out.
Yeah, falls all the time. Give me disguise anytime. D3 the whole way.
Yeah.
Perfect. So topic 4 and our final topic is all about advice, and what kind of advice that you would give to our student and early career audience. So I'm going to start off with a question, and it's about what's the best piece of advice that you yourselves have been that you yourselves have been given. So that could be from someone up higher, or etc. etc. Yeah, start off with Kate.
Well, I think I said this earlier in our pre-show, but I honestly, there's two things I remember really clearly. When I was 17 and I started out as a student assistant stage manager at Perth Repertory Theatre, there was a show we were doing called The Little Hut, and there were people being abandoned on a desert island, and the actor had to have a stick, and he did a balancing thing with this stick. And one night I couldn't find the stick. So I thought, well, I just have to use my nous and go and find a stick. And I've never forgotten the bawling out that the stage manager got from this actor saying, you need to verse your staff, because a stick wasn't just a stick. The stick was the stick. And so you can't ever assume anything. Always find out. So assumption is the mother of all F-ups, basically. And even now, I will always think that. So for instance, I did a wonderful show at in Cardiff, actually, the music of Doctor Who, which I just loved because it had David Tennant and Daleks and everything. I was just in seventh heaven. But I made it when there were volunteer stage management, and we went through everything about what they had to do. And the first volunteer stage manager had to just give the cue to the first person to start the show. And she was there and waiting. But I didn't say to her, tell the woman to walk into the box in order to start the show. So she just nothing happened. You know, the house lights went down and nothing happened, because you make the assumption that somebody will understand that they need to tell someone to actually move into a position. So never assume the smallest thing. I'd say always, doesn't matter. There is no such thing as a stupid question. No such thing is my best advice.
Oh, that's good. And
a friend of mine had an LX-op. Sorry, I was just going to interrupt. A friend of mine had an LX-op once when she was on tour. She was DSMing. She called the first 3 cues and nothing happened. And the LX-op didn't know that you hit the big green button when she said Geo.
Have you got any advice, Pippa?
So echoing what Kate said, the biggest thing that I've probably been taught is to say thank you. Like, it's really easy to tell people off when they don't know that you hit the big green button, But actually, if your very green LXOP does a very clean show for you, people respond really well to that. And it's something that I struggled with remembering, that people like to know when they've done really well. So yeah, saying thank you.
And
depressing, someone had to remind me to do that.
I mean, to be honest, it's not really advice, but you certainly learn from people above you. And I've had a lot of site managers in the past and people above me, and I've certainly learned from them to be a little kinder, for sure. You know, especially when I started out, there seemed to be like this dominance of ruling by fear, especially, and it sounds awful, but especially from women within the events industry, because we are in the minority, and sometimes you're there, you're you know, shouting and pushing yourself and making sure your voice is heard. And I certainly learned from a lot of people that isn't the way that I was going to be. I was going to manage, and certainly tried to be a little kinder. But advice that I've been given was to know your limits, really. When I say you're only as good as your last show, I don't mean it in a sense of like no one's going to employ you if you were rubbish in that show. I don't mean it like that. I mean you're only as good as your last show, that if you break your back, you're not going to be doing another show anytime soon. And there is this, you know, it is long hours on events, but you have to make yourself, you have to know your limits. There's no way, you know, where you're comfortable. If you are sat down for the whole time, don't just sit like, you know, you're crunched over for 20 hours. You know, you have to, you know, when people will ask you if you're okay. That's a silly thing to say, but you have to know your limits and look after yourself. And I will pace myself during build days, because I know that show days are really, really long, and I will always make sure that the site assistant has a box of chocolate or cereal bars somewhere for me to grab before I bite someone's head off, because that, I know I've learned that that's what happens when I want to bite someone's head off. It's usually because I want to bite a chocolate bar. So, you know, it's knowing your limits, really. That's what I'd say.
And Gareth, have you?
I learned how to be a good, or what I hope is a good stage manager, by working with some horrendous, rude, nasty bullies in my career. And you learn that's not the person you want to be. And you learn, I was bullied by a stage manager when I was younger, working out, and it was hideous. You know, now you wouldn't put up with it. When you were young and starting out, you would do. And that's not the person I want to be. So if I've had a bad day, I hope I'm the first one to go, sorry, I wasn't as polite as I could have been today. Completely pick up what you say. Thank everyone on your team. Being polite, being a good person. I want to be the good person people want to work with. But a few little tidbits I was told by people. One, early on, I was told, you know, don't run before you can walk. And I think ambition is great to have ambition, but there's a fine line between thinking, I just left drama school, I can go and call the biggest show in the world tomorrow. You probably can at some point, because if I can do it, anyone can do it. But you need to kind of know you need to, you know, work towards that. And if you're going around saying, you know, how amazing you are, you're not. No one wants to hear that. And just being and never being grand. I think, you know, you're always part of a team, no matter how big your team is. And if the team's busy and I've got nothing to do, I'll go and sweep the stage happily, because it helps them out. And I think that's the important thing, always to be. And, you know, we work on our teams. There's no hierarchy. We all have a different job to do. We've got a team of 30 of us, you know, everyone is important as everyone else. And there's lots of things. And the other thing I learned from someone was, you know, be nice to absolutely everyone on site. You know, say hello to everyone, because it makes for a nicer atmosphere. And you don't know when that person's really going to help you out. And I think the nicer you can be, the better, and just makes for, you want a nice environment. My best shows have been not because of the show we've produced, it's been because of the people and the laughs and the atmosphere we've had. And that's what is the most important to me. Just be nice, generally. It's the best thing I can say.
Yeah, perfect. And kind of what can the student and audience student and early career audience do now to kind of, if they want to work in events, what kind of stuff can they get to do to start building their experience and their rapport and that kind of stuff. Kate?
Well, the thing is that over the last year, the nature of events has changed, and they'll never go back, I don't think, at least for the next couple of years, to being exactly the way they were, because there's a certain element of virtual that will be there, certainly for a while, and maybe indefinitely now, because travel, flying is going to be seen as a little environmentally unfriendly, let alone if you're going to be coming from China or India or somewhere. You're not going to be coming from China or India, you're going to be virtualized in. So actually understanding technology from the point of view of thinking about how you call a show virtually as well as how you call a show live is definitely something worth considering. And the fact that young people now are so digitally savvy anyway, you're pretty much a step ahead from the older generation who had to learn all this stuff, because you just think about, just like tonight, essentially what you're looking at tonight is the equivalent of a virtual meeting. It's just that if you were calling this, then every single one of these pictures that you see would have a number, and you'd just be assigning it to a number and a look. You put 5 of them in on screen at once, or you put 4 of them on the screen at once, and there's a way of thinking differently about how you're looking at a show, and also getting your head around the fact that you're no longer looking at what happens on a big screen in a room. You're looking at putting a picture that is going out on a web stream. It's an entirely different way of thinking about things. And when you do come back to doing live, then it's going to be a bit of both. It's going to be some live, it's going to be some virtual. So just getting your head around, perhaps thinking about that combination of it is probably really useful. And my other piece of advice is, don't try and start in events until you've done some theatre. I really think it's very hard if you're going to show call, not necessarily as a stage manager, but I really think it's really useful to get that basic grounding under your belt about how you put a show together and how you call it before you try and go into this pressurized world, personally.
And Gareth?
I can never find unmute quick enough, sorry. Yeah, I think it's I get questioned all the time, how do you get started? And it is tricky. I think the first thing I would say is, if you're starting out, don't think you only want to be one thing. I went to drama school thinking I was going to do lighting design and came out as a stage manager. Just every opportunity you get, go and do it. If you're sound on one or Alexa, do everything, because if you want to be a stage manager and a show caller, to understand how every department works is essential, particularly if you're going to start scheduling rehearsals. And if you open yourself to every single opportunity given to you, you don't know who you're going to meet. I remember at drama school a couple of years ago, and one student was saying, I got asked to do panto at Christmas, but I want to take time off. I was like, you're crazy. You're young, you don't need time off because you're young and you're full of energy, but you don't know who you're going to meet on that job and where that will lead to, because this job is about people we know. So any opportunity you can get, go and grab it. Throw yourself, yes, as Kate says, it's very different landscape at the moment, but real life events will come back. Throw yourself at, production companies. Just say, can I come and shadow? Can I make the tea? Listen and immerse yourself in that world. And because the key thing that will get you into this world, I think Andy's way is your personality. People want nice people to be around with common sense, who are going to muck in and get the job done. And then that's how you progress. But any opportunity you get, and if it's remotely linked to what we do, say yes to it and be the best person you can. And that's what we like.
Perfect. Yeah. And Pippa, have you got anything?
Just to echo Gareth, you're graduating with tons of transferable skills. You can use them in all sorts of ways. Don't be afraid of crewing. Don't be afraid of getting muddy. Like I spent the summer 2 summers ago building a barn for the RHS. It was amazing. It was pissing it down. It was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. I wasn't even on site when it was live. But yeah, don't be afraid of, and if you try it and you hate it, at least you know you hate it. But if you never try it, you'll always wonder, what if I'd done that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I started off crewing, and I loved it. I loved it. So yeah, and Ange.
Exactly what the guys have said. Don't be afraid. You know, don't feel like you need to pigeonhole yourself instantly. Because it's just not the way the real world works. I mean, there's lots of people that have gone out and done one thing and stayed and done that thing, and it's been amazing for them. But especially when you're thinking about a different discipline, events or corporate, you have to be willing to start at the bottom. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be at the bottom for very long. I think that's what kind of scares everyone. They kind of work out in their head. They're like, okay, so I'll be crewing for like 2 years. No, you'll be crewing for 2 jobs until you meet someone who you're willing to ask them, do you have anything else? I really enjoy this part of the event. I really like what you guys were doing over there. Like, is that something that, you know, or do you have to like have qualifications for that? Or can I come and do that one time with you or whatever? You know, that's where the majority of assistants that I've had have come from, is that they were either volunteering, they were, you know, students who have called and asked, or, you know, or they even in some cases, very rarely, but there have been hunters, people at events who go and find somebody. You've got to ask a few people. I've never done it, but I feel like you have to ask quite a few security guards until you get one that's like, okay, yeah, fine, I'll get you somebody. Like, you're not just trying to get backstage. And I've spoken to a few people at events, at small events, where they're like, I really, really want to, you know, light in design this. I want to know who does that, like where, and I've gone and taken them to the person. You know, it depends if you catch me on a good day or how busy it is. Like, don't do it if it's like really raining. Nobody's going to talk to you. But I think it is, you just got to start a conversation and don't be scared to do it, because everybody's been there at one point. So everyone was at the start.
Perfect. And I've just had a live question come through, and it's quite a fun one, and it's just a short question, but describe your job in 3 words. Probably tough, but let's start off with Kate.
Oh, thanks very much for that one. Describe your job in 3 words. Get it right.
Perfect. And Gareth?
I would say over the last couple of years, my job is jet lag, fun and exciting.
That's more than 3 words. Oh, well, I guess it's not. Jet lag's one. Fair enough.
and
Oh, I'm not as good as you two. I can't think of anything. I was going to say in like location in that sort of sense, but as in like, you know, my job's just, that's it essentially. It's outdoors, green, muddy.
And Pippa?
Well, I'm a technical stage manager, but that's sort of cheating. I'd say it's mainly solving weird problems.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a lovely way to wrap up, I guess. Yeah, that's all of our questions. So thank you very much to all of the panelists and everyone who's watching. Yeah, it's been really interesting learning about all of your experiences. Such a variety. It's yeah, some great stories. Love it.